Let's say you're planning a trip to Seoul, Korea, and you've booked your hotels already. But maybe you're worried about getting bored of things within the city for the entire time you booked? Or you might be worried about the amount of tourists in the Seoul city limits, with Korea's massive influx of tourists, breaking records in 2025. Well, I'm going to introduce 5 ideas for day trips that can easily be done in one day with affordable access to and from via public transportation without the need of booking additional accommodation. They are perfect ideas for first-timers or even for those returning to Seoul looking for something new a bit outside the city. And to be honest, they are a bit on the touristy side still, which isn't a bad thing, making them comfortable to travel to without being too adventurous. But I plan on making a similar video for more unknown places as well in the future, so stay tuned to the channel if you're curious. I've lived and traveled all over Korea for more than 12 years now, and this video was made while paying for everything myself without sponsorships, in hopes to help other travelers out as honestly as possible to make the best decision for your trip here. I'll include a document in the description that has step-by-step directions and a rough itinerary to follow for each of the trips that goes into a bit more detail with how to get to each place. So with that out of the way, let's get started with one of my favorite places in all of Korea, a day trip to Suwon to see Hwaseong Fortress. Suwon is located about an hour south of Seoul in the province of Gyeonggi-do, the province surrounding Seoul, which it is the largest city and capital of. And just like Seoul has the Hanyang-dosong, or Seoul City Wall going around it, Suwon has the Hwaseong Fortress, a 5.7 kilometer long fortress wall with 4 gates built in the late 1700s by King Cheongjo of the Chosun dynasty to honor the remains of his father Prince Sado, who has some very dark history based around his death. So look it up if you're curious, as it's definitely not for everyone's ears. Luckily, in contrast to its history, it's actually quite pleasant to walk around and explore, with a lot of places to eat and relax in the area as well. Before we get started, I want to mention that this plan is meant for those on the active side, as we're going to be doing a lot of walking, but I'll also recommend 2 plans for those who are a bit less active, and one that would be suitable for those who aren't as active or require mobile aids. So let's start with how to get there. There are many ways to get to Hwaseong Fortress from Seoul, but I figure if we're going to Suwon anyways, we might as well get a glimpse of the main city a bit as well. So I'm gonna recommend going to Suwon Station either by taking the blue subway line number 1 or the yellow Suin Bundang line. There are also some direct buses in certain areas of the city, so use Naver Maps or Kakao Map's directions to find the best route from your location to Suwon Station, as it varies depending on where you are in Seoul. When you arrive at Suwon Station, you're in the heart of the city, and it has a lot of similarities to Seoul Station, with a department store filled with clothing shops called AK Plaza attached to it, and it's a very short walk to the Lotte Time Village shopping mall, a massive shopping mall with things to do for everyone. So if one of the people in your group wants to spend the day shopping instead, there are plenty of options for them. If you're looking for lunch right away, there's a food court right inside Suwon Station near the subway line 1 gates, so you can find something pretty fast if needed. And now that we're ready to start, we're gonna make our way to exit 7 of Suwon Station, and straight out the exit, you can find the entrance of the Suwon Rodeo Street. This is one of the main nightlife areas in Suwon, and it's certainly got a unique vibe to it even in the middle of the day, with restaurants, bars, and entertainment all over it. So feel free to stop at one of the arcades or photo booths on the way to the fortress. Also across the street is a traditional market called the Maesan-Sijang, with some very traditional restaurants and shops for those looking to explore some more. This day will require quite a bit of navigating, so I recommend following the itinerary in the description where I'll make things a bit easier to follow than just by watching the video. We're gonna walk straight through Rodeo Street and continue about 20 minutes until we see the Maesan Elementary School on the left side, identified by this wall with a picture of the Hwaseong Fortress on it. And then take the very next left to walk up the hill all the way to the top where you'll see a library on the right or east side, with the remains of a Japanese Shinto shrine that was built during the occupation of Korea in 1917. Continue past the pagoda statue and keep walking straight up the road all the way up the hill another 10 minutes or so until you arrive at the fortress wall, And now we have officially started the tour of Hwaseong Fortress. So it's time to head up to the top, following the stairs beside the wall. And for those who just want to start right at the wall here, instead of checking out the Suwon station area, take a bus to the Paldamun Gate in Suwon linked in the itinerary. And then just walk up the road leading directly west past the Loteria until you see the Visitors Center. Continue straight up the stairs beside the wall to arrive at this same spot. The walk up Padasam Mountain takes about 5 minutes. And when you get to the top, I recommend following the sign to the southwestern corner pavilion and walking directly through the Sonam Amun, or Southwest Hidden Gate, where you get a really good feel for what the fortress is like, walking on top of it with the flags on both sides and the strategically placed holes for archers to shoot through. After a short 5-minute walk, you arrive at Sonam Gangnu, the southwest corner tower that served as a watchtower and defensive structure. After checking it out a little bit, walk back up north to where you reach the top of the mountain, and continue north where you can see a monument to commemorate when Korea was liberated from Japan on March 1st, 1945. Just north of that, you can find the main visitors center to go to the bathroom or get some more information if needed. And now let's keep continuing north beside the wall towards Sojangdae, or the Western Command Post, which on the way there, you'll pass Hyeonejong, or Hyewon's Bell, which was built to honor the devotion of King Jeongjo, who built the fortress for his father. When you keep walking straight, you'll arrive at Sojangdae, or the Western Command Post, sitting grand atop the mountain, looking over the city, used as the central command post when it was built. You can get some really stunning views of Suwon from up here, and start to understand what kind of city it is. And if you look closely, you can even see other parts of the wall. There's also an archery platform you can walk up the very steep steps to get a feel for how the fortress was used. And after enjoying the views up top, continue walking down the stairs to the north side, where the wall goes through a little forest area that's perfect to get some shade if it's hot out, and you'll get some more really nice views of the wall with Suwon as a backdrop as you walk down back to the city. At the bottom of the hill, you'll start noticing some restaurants and even some hanok, or traditional Korean houses that you can stay in, so it could be a good option if you would like. And from this point forward, if you haven't eaten lunch yet, you can grab a bite to eat pretty much anywhere, as restaurants will be all over the place going forward. As you get down to the bottom of the hill, you'll arrive at the first major gate called Hwaseong, which means splendor to the west, reflecting the king's wish that Suwon would flourish towards the western region. It's quite grand, and very similar to the gates you can see in Seoul, such as the famous Namdaemun or Dongdaemun. This is also one of the most beautiful parts of the city section of the wall, as they have renovated a lot of the older buildings nearby really nicely and turned them into cafes and restaurants, almost rebranding the whole neighborhood, which is now called Haengnidanggil. I went to a restaurant called Cheongsan Shigo Sambap that sells Cheuk Sambap, or marinated pork lettuce wraps. Normally you're supposed to order 2 servings, but they allowed me to attempt to eat all of this by myself for 14,000 won. And this is Hanshik, or Korean food at its finest, so I highly recommend it. Now we continue along the wall to arrive at Changhamun, which means gate to the capital, the main northern gate and the most famous gate of the entire Hwaseong fortress. I definitely recommend walking around it from all angles, taking some pictures and just marveling at all the details in the architecture, as it's one of the most interesting parts of today's journey. And now we are about halfway done walking around the wall. To be completely honest, we have seen the most interesting parts of the wall itself now. There's still a palace left over that we will end the day at, so you can make your decision if you'll continue to walk the remainder of it, which is another 3.5 kilometers or 1 hour, or we can choose to start heading south from Changhamun directly to the palace. I'll show you the rest of the wall just to show you what you can see. You'll start out with some more flat sections similar to the area around Haengnidanggil, where we had lunch, and then arrive at Hwahongmun, meaning Rainbow Gate, a water gate that was used for water management back then. Here we get some really cool views of the wall continuing up the hills, and you end up in a really wide open area that's pretty hot in the summer, but beautiful in the cooler weather to get some panoramas of the city. We arrive at Deungjangdae, the Beacon Tower, another watchtower of the fortress, and continue all the way east to see another defensive structure called Dongbuk Gongsimdon, and then the east gate called Changnyeonmun, or Gate of the Soaring Dragon. Now we can continue walking south along the wall past some more interesting structures about 20 minutes. You get closer to a massive cathedral, and finally you arrive at Namsumun, the southern water gate, which I think looks really interesting as it's a true blend of the old and the new. And now we are back in the heart of the city, finishing at Padamun, the southern gate, meaning 8-branched gate, which I've always thought looks really interesting with the big roundabout for cars to go around. And just like that, we have now completed the full fortress wall. For those who like to explore more, I recommend checking out the Suwon Namun Market, a massive traditional market that sells everything from produce, textiles, and clothing that could be really cool to check out. And to end the tour, it's time to walk to the palace that I talked about earlier. You can walk straight north of Padamun about 5 minutes until you reach a massive plaza area called Haengung Gwangjang, or Hwaseong Haengung Square, surrounded by the Suwon City Museum of Art, the Cheongjo themed performance hall which you can catch performances at sometimes, and of course, Hwaseong Haengung, the temporary palace used by King Cheongjo when he visited Suwon while inspecting the fortress or participating in ceremonies. When you arrive at Hwaseong Haengung, you feel instantly transported to the past, with some beautiful traditional Korean architecture. And before we get started, I want to mention that there is a martial arts performance performed here every day except for Mondays at 11 a.m. I thought it was pretty interesting as they show off a variety of weapons they used back in the day, and even show some of them in action. So if you want to see it, consider starting your day here at the palace before walking around the wall. Or plan your trip early enough so you arrive here at about 11 a.m. The palace itself costs 2,000 won to enter, and when you get inside, there are a lot of little alleyways and passageways to walk around, where you can learn a lot about the different kind of structures used at a traditional Korean palace, what kind of ceremonies were performed there, and also have a look at the throne room itself, which is grand and majestic with a beautiful painting of the mountains behind. Honestly, I enjoy walking around Hwaseong Haengung a lot more than Gyeongbokgung in Seoul these days, just because it's a lot quieter overall. It's definitely not as flashy or grand, but it still has its own charm. I love the taegeukgi, or traditional Korean flag paintings on the doors, and as a bonus, you can walk up the hill behind it to get a view of the entire palace from higher ground, which not many people do, but is definitely worth checking out. And that's that, so now we have shown you a day trip to Suwon for the most active people, so please check the itinerary for plans catered towards other types of travelers. And with that arguably over-detailed first day trip to Suwon out of the way, let's show a bit of a briefer day trip that I think most people visiting Seoul would show the most interest in, right up at the demilitarized zone between South and North Korea, the DMZ. The DMZ, or Demilitarized Zone, is a 4-kilometer wide zone that runs along the 250-kilometer border between South and North Korea. And taking a tour there is an experience that I think would be the most interesting for the average traveler, so I had to include it on this list. As being able to go right to the JSA, or Joint Security Area, that's jointly guarded by the South and the North, and literally step your foot into North Korean soil is definitely a wild experience. Mostly just because of how much we hear about North Korea in Western media. However, in 2023, while on a DMZ tour himself, an American soldier named Travis King broke the rules and started sprinting over the border to North Korea, causing a huge commotion, resulting in him being held by North Korean authorities for a few months until he was released back to the States to be punished for his actions, resulting in the JSA being closed to travelers for about 2 years, making the DMZ tour a lot less worth it in my opinion. But as of summer 2025, it's again possible to visit the Joint Security Area, and there are a few companies that do it. I'm not able to recommend a specific company, but if you do a Google search for DMZ JSA tour, there are a few companies handling the tours on a very limited basis. So it would be good to book somewhat far in advance, and the price is about 220,000 Korean won. So it's not that cheap, but definitely worth it in my opinion. I'll go over what the tour is like with some photos I shot in 2014. Make sure you prepare your passport first, as you'll start by taking a bus in central Seoul early in the morning at around 7 a.m. And they'll check your passport immediately. You will head straight north of Seoul for about an hour to a place called Imjingak in the city of Paju. This is a tourist complex built in 1972 right on the Imjin River, located about 7 kilometers away from North Korea. And it was originally built in hopes to reunify and to comfort families who couldn't return to their homes in the north. Here you can see the Freedom Bridge, a temporary bridge built in 1953 at the end of the Korean War to transport the South Korean and UN prisoners of war back down south after the war ended. It was built right beside the original railway bridge that was bombed in 1951 during the Korean War, which you can still see the remains of today. There are also other monuments such as the Last Train, a steam locomotive that was bombed during the war, with over 1,000 bullet holes in it. There are also some more leisure things to do at the resort, like a cable car, a theme park, and a VR experience. But I'm not sure if you'll do any of it during the tour, to be honest. And then after visiting the resort, you'll go to the Dora Observatory across the river, where you can get some views into North Korea, specifically the city of Hwaseong, and Kijeongdong or Propaganda Village, with a massive North Korean flag that can be seen in certain places in the south. You then go to the third infiltration tunnel, a 1.6 kilometer long tunnel built by the North in an attempt to invade the South after the war, which was discovered in 1978. After learning some history of the Korean War at and around Imjinggak, you'll eat lunch and then head to Camp Boniface, where you'll visit the JSA Visitor Center. Here they'll brief you on all the rules of what you are and aren't allowed to do while visiting the joint security area. And it's definitely important to listen carefully and take this very seriously, as they are extremely strict about everything, including taking pictures and joking around. After learning the rules, it's time for the bread and butter, visiting the joint security area itself. You'll start lined up on the South Korean side, where you'll see the South Korean soldiers from the back guarding the border. And if you're lucky, you can see North Korean soldiers guarding it from the north as well. There will be guards constantly supervising you, making sure you follow all the rules. And after standing there for a bit, you'll get a chance to enter the main buildings where a lot of inter-Korean talks and summits have been held. The buildings are half on North Korean soil and half on the south, so you get a chance to physically be inside North Korea for a little bit. And you can even take a picture with the guards. This part of the tour might be different now than when I did it in 2014, as they are probably even stricter these days. But I'd make sure you're able to visit the actual JSA if you're doing a DMZ tour, as I don't think it'd be as interesting without it. You can also see the Bridge of No Return, where the prisoner of war exchange occurred after the war, where Koreans could choose to cross the bridge to either side, and they would commit their life to the north or the south depending on what they chose. But the tour is over now, and you'll return to Seoul by bus in time for dinner. Definitely a really interesting experience that I'll always remember, and I think is very well worth it at least one time. But now that we're finished with the DMZ, let's go back in time to the city of Yongin for the next trip to the Korean folk village. The Korean folk village is located in the city of Yongin, situated just to the east of Suwon we showed earlier. And the folk village can be seen kind of like a living museum that showcases Korean traditional life from the Chosun dynasty from the late 1300s to early 1900s. It also doubles as a theme park with various attractions and rides for children. To get there from Seoul, first of all, there are 3 direct buses. Bus 5001-1 or 5001-1A that leaves from Shinonhyun Station in Gangnam just outside exit 7. Bus 1560A that leaves right from Gangnam Station in between exits 4 and 5 at the bus stop in the middle of the road. And bus 4101 that leaves from Seoul Station by going out exit 4 and walking straight to the bus stop just southwest of Sungnaemun, the massive traditional gate there. It's also possible to take the yellow Suimbundang subway line to Sangga Station, go out exit 3, and get on bus 10-5, 30, 37, or 54. The Korean folk village requires a ticket to enter, which is typically 37,000 won for adults, but there are so many different discounts available listed on their website that I'll link in the itinerary, with the best discount being the one if you took public transportation there, making it only 15,000 won to enter. However, the discount window was closed near the entrance, so I had to purchase a weekday discount ticket for 19,000 won instead. Still a pretty good deal though. Now that we have our tickets sorted, it's time to enter the folk village. The Korean folk village is pretty massive at 245 acres, so it should take you most of the day to explore. And I strongly recommend picking up a map when you enter, as it'll help you a lot to explore throughout the day. Also, there is a list of the performances that you can see there right when you enter, so I recommend taking a picture of this list and making note of which ones you're interested in, as if you just wander around aimlessly, it's quite easy to miss the performances. The ones I recommend the most are the Pungmu Hangarak or Pungmu Harmony, a traditional Korean percussion dance that was really various, dynamic, and colorful. I especially like the dance with buche, or traditional Korean fans, where they created some really interesting moves and shapes with them. Then the most exciting one was the Musangmuye, or equestrian feats, an acrobatic show that showcases the horseback riding skills of the Joseon Dynasty knights. I think this is an absolute must-see, but unfortunately they weren't showing it when I visited in early November 2025, so I'd look on the website in advance just so you aren't expecting to see it and then disappointed later on. The traditional wedding ceremony called Pyeongnyang Kayak was quite cool to see as well, blending music with comedy for a great entrance to the village as it started right when I arrived at 2 p.m. And as far as an itinerary goes, I don't think it makes much sense to follow a specific plan at the Korean folk village. It's set up perfectly for people to wander around at their own pace, so I'll just showcase some of the highlights of the various areas so you know what to expect before making your trip there. You start out in the Market Village, a traditional Korean village set up with all the main amenities such as the information center and stroller or wheelchair rentals as well, as the majority of the park is set up for those with mobile aids. Then there is a row of restaurants and street food that you can try. I decided to try out the Hwaeori Kamja, or tornado potato, a roasted potato cut into a long spiral with cheese seasoning sprinkled on top, and it was the perfect start to my journey, as there was a lot of walking to be had ahead. There is also hanbok, or traditional Korean clothing rentals here, as the folk village is perfect for those looking to walk around, taking photos of themselves in hanbok as well. To the south of the market village is the amusement village. This is set up like a theme park for kids that would be perfect for families with small children that might not be as interested in learning about the history of Korea. I won't go too much into detail here, but there are some rides such as a little coaster, a Viking ship, mini train, and more to keep children entertained for hours on end while the older ones explore the rest of the village. Now we get to the main attraction, the folk village, which takes up the majority of the park. When you first enter it from the market village or the main entrance of the park, you'll see a row of workshops called the Workshop Street, where you can find artists creating various traditional goods such as masks, musical instruments, or utensils that can be bought as souvenirs. And they are all made with traditional methods that seem quite high in quality. If you want to try making something yourself, there are also workshops set up throughout the village where you can try making pottery, traditional or modern masks, and traditional dyeing methods to make handkerchiefs. Then for the folk village itself, there are about 270 real houses that showcase the difference in lifestyle between each province in Korea back during the Joseon Dynasty. You can see details of how things were done in day-to-day lives, how their houses were heated, how they farmed, how the food was stored and fermented, and so much more to learn all about how Koreans lived during the Joseon Dynasty. You can also play traditional games scattered throughout the village. They even go into detail to show how people were disciplined and tortured back in the day, and you can try some of the methods yourself if you're brave enough. There's even a traditional ranch with horses in the middle of the park. And then at the very north of the folk village, if you walk up the hill, there's even a real Buddhist temple called Kumyeonsa, with monks and everything. Surprising to see since the rest of the park is more set up like a fantasy. Then, if you cross the bridges to the south, you'll learn about education a bit with the Cheonghyun Suwon, a traditional Joseon Dynasty Confucian Academy, as Confucianism has been taught and practiced since even before the Joseon Dynasty, about 1600 years ago. Then there's a full-on museum that goes over in depth showing different ways foods were prepared and displayed for various ceremonies. You can also learn about the old ways of kimjang, or kimchi making there. Then over in the northeastern part of the village, you can find the nobleman's mansion, showing how the wealthy people lived. And right beside it, you can try traditional Korean archery, or go to the Horror Experience Center to find haunted houses and outdoor mazes all based off of traditional Korean folktales, which require an additional charge. And then the last part of the park is the marketplace furthest to the east, where there's a massive cafeteria area to try tons of different Korean dishes, alcohol, or buy souvenirs if you want. And that wraps up what I thought was most interesting at the Korean folk village. There are truly too many things to put in the video, so I recommend going somewhat early, expecting to spend the majority of the day there, as it's so easy to lose track of time while walking around enjoying all it has to offer. And to top it off, sometimes they offer ceremonies at nighttime, but when I went on a quiet weekday, it was closed by 6 p.m. So I'd check the schedule in advance to make sure you get the experience you want. And with that out of the way, it's time for an attraction I think most tourists don't know much about, but could be interesting for some. A trip to Incheon to see its very own Chinatown. Incheon is the third largest city in Korea, below Seoul and Busan, with about 3 million people, which is located just west of Seoul, the location of the Incheon airport, which most travelers know it from. But way before there was an airport, all the way back in 1883, the Incheon port opened up, which geographically is not that far away from China's east coast, and Chinese immigrants arrived shortly after. As numbers grew, the area around Incheon port became the center for Chinese commerce, and thus Chinatown was established. This is probably the least well-known option out of the 5 trips on this list, but I'd say give it some thought, especially if you want to see a tourist area catered more towards Koreans than to international travelers, as that can be fun in itself, especially with the end of the day trip at a little island with a lot of charm called Wolmido. The easiest way to get to Chinatown from Seoul is to take subway line number 1 to Incheon Station, and make sure you get on the train going towards Incheon and not south to Shinchang, as the line number 1 splits at Guro Station in Seoul, so you can easily accidentally end up all the way south in the province of Chungcheongdo if you aren't careful. It's also possible to get there by the yellow Suwon line, but this would only be faster from areas southeast of Incheon, such as Suwon. When you arrive at Incheon Station, just get out exit 1, and you'll see the big Chinese-style gate called Chungwaga across the street. Immediately you'll feel the Chinese influence with all the little details in architecture. You can see a map of the area right when you enter, so definitely check it out and see if there are any areas of interest. I'd personally just recommend going for a stroll up the street, taking in the details, and then consider checking out a cafe like this one called Kabe Chagwan that specializes in traditional Hong Kong-style milk teas and even Hong Kong coffee, which I tried and was pleasantly surprised by its blend of not too sweet and somewhat bitterness in a good way, giving a unique experience you don't find a lot of in Korea. After going for a coffee or tea, I recommend just roaming around the streets, and if you're hungry, you can try some street food such as konggapang or crunchy balloon bread, as apparently it's hollow inside, which originated from the Chinese immigrants back in the day. There are also a lot of modern options to try as well. And now here's where the tour gets a little bit wacky, in a good way. We're gonna head to the Jjajangmyeon Museum. And for those that don't know, Jjajangmyeon is a Korean dish featuring noodles and black bean paste sauce that was invented in the late 19th century right here in Incheon. The dish stems from the Chinese dish,
炸酱面
but adapted to be darker, sweeter, and richer in flavor to the Korean taste palette. The museum is located in the actual building of the very first restaurant that offered it, which is called Konghwachun, and opened up all the way back in 1912. And it operated all the way until 1983, when it closed due to government restrictions. And it was reopened as a museum in 2012. The museum is located just off the main street. It costs 1,000 won to enter, and inside you can learn about the history of jjajangmyeon, how it's made, and see some memorabilia from the original restaurant as well. However, this museum is not catered to international tourists as it's all written in Korean, but it's still worth it in my opinion just to experience the history, and you can use Papago or Google Translate to translate the signs into English no problem. After checking out the museum for a bit under an hour, you're probably going to be craving some jjajangmyeon, especially since you're in the birthplace of it. Well, pretty much all the restaurants in the surrounding area sell it, but there is one in particular that has captured everyone's attention for years on end, called Shinseungbanjeom, as it claims that it's a continuation of Konghwachun's history. It's so popular that there will always be a wait, but there was only one team ahead of me waiting at 11:45 a.m. on a weekday. I also love the atmosphere there, going right through part of their kitchen to get to my table. I ordered the uni jjajangmyeon, or jjajangmyeon with finely sliced ingredients, as that's what was recommended on the menu. I prefer to cut the noodles to make it easier to mix and eat, but there are some Koreans who would not be proud of me for doing this, so pick a side and stick to it for life. Team scissors or no scissors. Then you can pour the black bean sauce in and stir it up like a pro with your chopsticks, and enjoy. Jjajangmyeon is always good in my opinion, whether it's 3,000 won or over 11,000 won like it is here. But this one was definitely worth it, since we learnt about its history and we traveled all the way to get here. And now our stomach is nice and full to explore more of the area. Going back up the main street, you'll find a bunch of stairs right next to the massive red Chinese restaurants. If you're on the active side, I recommend walking up them to the top, as it's the perfect way to digest your meal. And you can go all the way up to Jaeugongwon, or Freedom Park. This was the first Western-style park in Korea, established all the way back in 1888, built after the Treaty of Peace was signed between Korea and the USA. Korea's first treaty with a Western nation. Nowadays, you can find a big statue of Douglas MacArthur, an American general who is most well known as being a top commander during World War II and the Korean War. He's still commemorated here in Korea to this day. You can also find great views of Incheon Port, which is called Jaemupo until 1949. It would definitely be nicer than this on a clear day, but still great to get a glimpse of the area and see where Chinatown came from. If you want to learn some more history of the area, consider walking down to the Jaemupo Gurakbu, which was a social club established in 1901 for foreign residents living in Incheon back in the day. Founded to promote friendship and provide a social venue for foreigners from mostly Western countries. It's not a must-see, but I thought it was pretty interesting to check out. Also with most of its information written in Korean. And after checking out the park and potentially the social club, start making your way back to Chinatown, and head north along the street away from the main entrance. I recommend just roaming around looking at everything. You can buy souvenirs if you want, eat street food if you still have the appetite, or just keep wandering towards Songhwadong Donghwamal, or Songhwadong Fairy Tale Village, which is another area with various themed shops, cafes, and restaurants. That could be a good way to spend some of the afternoon. And now we are finished with Chinatown, so you can head back to Seoul if you want, but there's an island nearby with a lot of charm that I recommend checking out if you have the energy, called Wolmido. What used to be an island, now connected to the mainland. To get there, first make your way back to Incheon Station, and at the bus stop just outside of it, take bus number 2, 10, or 45 towards Wolmido, and get off at one of the stops near the Wolmido Culture Street. When you arrive, you can head straight to the Culture Street, or there are some little theme parks a bit inland which are cool to check out. And a big blast to the past of how a lot of theme parks used to look like in Korea. But the main attraction is definitely the Wolmido Culture Street, a big boardwalk along Korea's West Sea. It looks out towards Yeongjongdo, the island Incheon Airport is on, and the boardwalk almost reminds me a bit of the New Jersey boardwalk on the east coast of USA, with some goofy shops and carnival games everywhere, a monorail going to and from Incheon Station, which can be ridden instead of the bus of course, a lot of seafood restaurants, which if you haven't tried, I'd recommend trying jogegui or clam barbecue, mostly just being clams, scallops, and sometimes oysters barbecued on hot coal. But it's quite tasty when paired with chojang, or vinegar-based red pepper paste. There is also a massive arcade on the southern part of the boardwalk called Dang Games, with a ton of arcade machines, and of course claw machines, which are constantly updated with the newest trends. And then some more carnival-style rides outside of it, all topped off with a big Ferris wheel. Wolmido is the perfect place to just spend the afternoon and dinner time before heading back to Seoul, and a great place to feel a bit of Korea's countryside charm, which isn't as easy to feel within Seoul city limits. But that's it for Chinatown and Wolmido, so it's time to end this list with a big one that a lot of people have asked me about, Nami Island. Nami Island is located in the city of Gapyeong, about an hour northeast of Seoul, right on the northern end of the Han River, the same river running through Seoul, and it's been open to tourists since 1966, although it didn't become massively popular until almost 40 years later in 2002 because of the drama Winter Sonata that was filmed there. Usually I save the best for last, But in this case, I saved one of the most popular for last, so I could introduce the other places first. And although Nami Island is certainly beautiful, personally I'd rank it at around number 4 or 5 out of these 5-day trips. But it could be your number 1 on this list. So let's go over what you can expect, starting first with how to get there. The easiest way to get there is to take a shuttle bus, which leaves from areas in Seoul such as Hongdae, Myeongdong, or Dongdaemun, and can be reserved on Klook, which I linked in the itinerary. But if you're on a tighter budget, you can take public transportation there as well. First, you need to get to Gapyeong Station, which you can get to either by taking the Gyeongchun line from Cheongnyang Station in northeast Seoul, which doesn't leave very frequently. So check the times on Naver Maps by clicking the profile icon next to the search bar, click on subway, locate Cheongnyang Station, and then look at the timetable for the Gyeongchun line. Or you can take the ITX train from Yongsan Station, which must be reserved in advance on the Korail website or Korail Talk app, which is about 7,000 won each way. Once you arrive at Gapyeong Station, walk straight out of the exit, cross the street, and on your right there is a bus stop, where you can take the 10-4 bus to Nami Island Ferry. But if you miss it, you can always take a taxi, or it's about a 30-minute walk. When you arrive at the ferry platform, tickets can be bought on site for 19,000 won, but my frugalness brought me to Klook instead, where you can get a little bit of a discount. The first ferry is at 8 a.m., and here is the time schedule for the ferry. Honestly, it leaves so frequently that you don't really need to think much about it too. You can board the ferry directly with the Klook QR code, so you don't need to print out any tickets. And Nami Island is extremely popular, especially during the fall season when I went, so the ferry was packed at 8 a.m. It only takes about 5 to 10 minutes to arrive at the island, and then you are good to go to start exploring. Nami Island is another one of those places that doesn't require a strict itinerary, as it's set up kinda like a theme park. So I think it's best to just grab a map from the tourist center on the right when you arrive, and start wandering around to places that look interesting to you, as there are a ton of them all over the island. However, I do want to mention that it's about 5 kilometers in circumference and pretty much completely flat. For somewhat active people, you'll have no problem at all walking around and seeing everything. But if you want, you can rent a bike at the bike center in the middle of the island. There's also a charity train that goes through the middle of the island, and story tour buses that go around the circumference. It's also flat enough for people with mobile aids. It was pretty foggy and chilly when I arrived on November 5th, so I decided to go for a walk first to the very northern point, and notice some beautiful fall foliage on the way. Walking around the island, there are little displays and attractions all over the place to look at or take pictures of. And there is a bit of wildlife to look at as well, with various birds such as woodpeckers, and of course magpies flying around. There are even peacocks that roam around the island. And the eastern side of the island was really nice for a morning stroll, with signs here and there showing various filming locations of Winter Sonata as well. There is also a bit of history to see on the island, as the name Nami Island actually comes from General Nami, a Korean general from the Chosun dynasty who was falsely accused of treason and executed as a result. But his tomb still lies here on Nami Island today, and I'm sure he'd be happy to know he's being remembered in such fashion. Right below General Nami's tomb, there is a song museum, as one of the island's nicknames is the Island of Songs, since there are a lot of music festivals there in the warmer seasons. And in the museum, you can get an overview of who's performed there with some memorabilia to look at too. And there's also a massive cafe attached to it. I was heading towards the southern tip, and on the way there, noticed some swan boats, which I've heard are quite popular when the weather doesn't look straight out of a Silent Hill game. And after walking just about 20 minutes or so down the eastern side, I was already on the southern part of the island. This is where you can find a nice hotel called the Hotel Cheongwalu, which can be booked for about 80,000 won on weekdays and 125,000 won on weekends if people want to spend the night there. It looks like a pretty relaxing place to stay, but there wouldn't be much to do at nighttime, I don't think. You can also book little bungalow units on the southwest part of the island that are right on the river and could be a really peaceful place to stay. I didn't prepare very well, so I was getting pretty cold and decided to head back north a bit to the very center of the island. This is where there are a lot of galleries, cafes, and restaurants to eat at or look around. I found a really cozy book cafe to warm up in, and luckily for me, the sun came out while I was inside, so I could start exploring the island properly. After going back outside, I think I discovered the main reason that people come to Nami Island for. There are some really beautiful roads of trees that definitely appeared in the Winter Sonata drama, and tons of people were there taking photos with the beautiful fall foliage. It's really nice to look at, and probably Nami Island's main charm. But just so people know, Nami Island isn't the only place to get views like this. So if this is your main reason to go there, I'd consider a shorter trip to Seoul Forest instead, which I think would be equally as beautiful in the fall time. But either way, the rows of trees were spectacular, and I definitely don't want to take any of the magic away from them. I found myself getting lost just staring at their beauty countless times. Other than that, there's the ostrich village just south of where you get off the ferry, where you can go right up to the ostriches or look at the babies from a distance. There's a Trigo village that has a little tree coaster for kids just south of there, a full-on dog park with obstacles, and there's even some places where you can make stuff, like a handicraft studio where you get to create your own little glass crafts, near all the restaurants in the center. But the true magic of Nami Island is just all the little details everywhere. So instead of me talking about them, I'll put on a relaxing song and show you some of the highlights. I'd spent about 4 hours on the island now, so it was time for some lunch. And there are a lot of different options, including international food and halal food. But since this is a guide for people traveling Korea, I went to Nammun, the Korean restaurant there, and tried a mini jimdak, or mini steamed chicken, which was nothing special, but pretty good overall, and perfect to enjoy outside in the nice fall weather. Before I decided to head back at about 12:45 p.m., just as the island was getting busier with tourists, and tons of visitors were making their way to start their day. I've heard the lineups can be long when going back to the mainland, so I'd recommend visiting the island early like I did, or if needed, there's a speedboat you can hire for 10,000 won to skip the lines. When you get back, there are also a ton of restaurants close to the ferry terminal, so if there are too many people at the restaurants on the island, I'd just head back as a lot of them look big and spacious. And that's an overview of Nami Island, the last day trip on my list of top 5 day trips to do from Seoul. And remember, these are the ones I think the average tourist would be interested in. So stick around to the channel, as I'll probably make another guide for people a bit more on the adventurous side within the next little while. I hope you have a wonderful trip to Korea, make lots of good memories, and don't worry too much about the amount of tourists it's getting or about getting bored. It's always best to arrive with low expectations and leave with great memories. Thank you so much for watching until the end, and hope to see you soon in another video.